Welcome to the January edition of our Core Collective series, a string of events that uncovers learnings from inspiring leaders in the underscore core. Last month, we had Michael Cho talk about raising a Series A with no startup experience. And this month, we are thrilled to be speaking with David Cancel, CEO of Drift. So please give David a warm welcome. And thank you for joining us.
Woo!
Before we get started, just some light housekeeping. As a goal of this event is to gather collective learnings. That includes you, so we hope you'll be able to add to this conversation. Please add any learnings or questions to the chat, and we'll reserve about 20 minutes at the end for some Q&A. Please add in the Q&A section your question, and then I'll message you to see if you're open to actually opening your video and asking it to David himself. We'll be live tweeting today, and we hope you'll join us. You could find us at _VC on Twitter. And lastly, if this is your first core event, welcome. You might be wondering what the underscore core is all about. So I'll drop a link in the chat that will share some more information about the community of entrepreneurs, talent, domain experts who support each other not only as peers, but also help underscore through our investment process. And with that, I'll hand it over to Lindsay Christensen, underscore core member and CMO of ThoughtBot, to officially welcome and introduce David and kick off the conversation.
All right. Thanks, Jenny. Thanks, underscore. Yeah, so let me introduce who we're going to be hearing from today. David is best known for creating hypergrowth products and product teams at companies such as Drift, HubSpot, Performable, Ghostery, and Compete. He has written not one, but 2 books, and he's been featured in the New York Times, Forbes, Fortune, Wired, and Fast Company. He has also guest lectured on entrepreneurship at Harvard Business School, MIT's Sloan School of Management, and other universities, and he is currently the co-founder and CEO of Drift, the world's first conversational marketing and sales platform. Welcome, David. Looking forward to chatting today.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited.
You're probably also wondering who I am. My name is Lindsay Christensen. I'm the CMO at ThoughtBot, and I've been working at high growth startup marketing teams and enterprise marketing teams around Boston. ThoughtBot is a product design and development consultancy that works with founders at every stage to help launch, grow, and nurture their products. So excited to talk about product stuff with you today, David.
Let's geek out.
Yeah, let's geek out. Let's assume maybe some people here don't know you or know Drift, because I want to go back into the early days.
Sure.
But it might be helpful to kind of get a baseline. Where is Drift today in terms of like size, maturity, product?
Sure. So Drift is now officially 6 years old this month, which is amazing. In some ways, it feels a lot faster. In other ways, startup years, Lindsay, it feels like 60 years have gone by. And so we are now somewhere over 400 employees, mostly in the US, so Boston, San Francisco, Tampa, people all over the place, and now in London and the UK, London and Australia.
Happy birthday to Drift.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of growth. We're going to time machine back to the early days, and you're looking for product market fit. So first of all, what does that even mean to you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I used to geek out on product market fit, and I used to love that stage, and having gone through it now again at Drift, I never want to go back to that stage. I think that's the most painful stage of a startup. It's the part that we often talk the most about and glorify, but it's like, it was incredibly painful. The analogy I would always use is that it's kind of like pre-product market fit. That time until you hit it is basically walking through the desert and aimlessly, and walking really hard, and but never having a reference point, right? Like no matter what direction you look in, there's just more desert. And so every day you're you think you're making progress, but you don't know if you're going deeper into the desert or you're on your way out. And then one magical day, you get out of the desert and you're at the base of a giant mountain, and that's the day that you've hit product market fit. And now you have this journey, and many will die climbing this mountain, but at least you know where the top is, right? You're not walking around aimless anymore. And so for product market fit, for me, it's just like, it's this iteration phase where you're constantly testing with customers, and easier in our context, which is B2B, because you can actually identify and talk to those customers versus B2C, and iterating and trying to find, that thing of value that can be your first product, that can be your first service that you're bringing to market. And this constant kind of validation, it never ends after product market fit, but that's the initial first kind of beachhead that you make into a market.
How do you know when you've hit it?
That's a good question. I think for me, it's always like when it's repeatable, like when you have a repeatable process. And again, in B2B, it's easier because like you can actually ask people for money. And so like, will they pay you for this thing? Is it a repeatable product? Do you have some level of satisfaction in the product? And you feel like you can sell it? It's not a bespoke product, right? You can sell that product to lots of different companies. That's when we have that little beginnings of a repeatable flywheel. It starts to feel like product market fit to us. But you're never totally sure, right? You keep going, and then you have different little landmarks that you're headed towards to try to see and validate if you do have product market fit.
So often we talk about the things that went right and the things that ended up working out, assumptions that were correct. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, in the early days when you're looking for product market fit, do you recall like some like hypotheses or assumptions you had about the product or the market that you ended up learning were completely off?
yeah, lots of them. So I think, the product that we think about as Drift now, or the first version of Drift that we went public with, was probably the fourth product that we created in that first year and a half. And so we created, and depending on which products we were working, some we scrapped right away, some we went on for 6 months, 9 months with that product, and then ultimately scrapped. We thought, the things that were right were, we were betting on these megatrends that were happening. This kind of, move to a messaging first kind of life that we all live now. We thought that was right. And we thought, that we could affect the way that people communicate in business contexts around buying. And so, that was right. But what was wrong was kind of how did we manifest that? We created one version that was basically a way to communicate around sharing digital assets like files and images and stuff like that. And then a whole bunch of apps came out at the same time. Red Pen, which is one that does it on the UX kind of creative side. Envision had something similar. And then the worst was Dropbox came up with the in-panel kind of commenting, which was almost identical to what we were doing. And so like we kind of scrapped that pretty quickly because we didn't really have a way to have an advantage in that. Then we created a next version, which was a visual version of it. Think of it like the way that you can annotate photos in Snapchat or Instagram or something like that. But at the time, you couldn't do that really. And so we came out with that and then ran with that for a while, and then ultimately sold that to a company called Cloud App that we actually use today.
So to test those things, were you actually releasing product and then seeing what happened?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like we were doing a couple things. We were talking to early prospects, friends, basically friends that we thought would buy this product or would be interested in this product. And then we would, as quickly as possible, try to ask them for money. And so I always say I have this thing called again, in B2B, like the dollar test, just like if you have someone that you think might be interested in your product that's talking to you about that shows interest, like the thing that I try to immediately do is like ask them if they'll pay for it. Even in most cases, we haven't even created the product. And so and we don't actually care like how much they pay. It's usually just what they have on them, $20, $5, whatever. And then we would say, you can use the product for, that version of the product forever if you pay for it. And what you find is the reason I started doing this is that people will often meet with you and spend a lot of time with you that actually have no interest in the product or what you're doing, but that's because they're nice and because they're trying to help you. And that's kind of a false signal if they actually have the pain that you're trying to solve. And as soon as you ask, even for $5, which is like, a ridiculous amount, they'll usually say no. And that's when you actually get the no. That's what you want. You want the negative signal. You want a no or a yes. You want like a hell yes or hell no. Like you just don't want indifference, which I think indifference is the killer when it comes to creating products. And most people are indifferent about what you're creating.
That's a great tip. So you've also talked a lot about hypergrowth, both of Drift and of your customers. When you're working on early product market fit, doing these tests, do you have hypergrowth in mind? Is that a later consideration? You're not quite there yet. Like when does that kind of concept and planning come into the conversation?
It comes in a couple different ways. I mean, the reason that we started to talk about this idea of hypergrowth was that we were kind of trying to enter I think in creating products like we do, these kind of products that we're talking about, SaaS-based products, web-based products, like the thing that you want to try to do is to build on existing behavior changes, because most entrepreneurs will do, including myself, which is usually leads to lots of pain, is try to create a better mousetrap, thinking that if it's so great and because they love it so much that they're going to cause some set of people to change their behavior and use this thing. But that's almost impossible, because like it's almost impossible to change someone's habits and behavior. And so you want to actually try to look for massive behavior change that's already happening. And like the easiest way to do that, I think, is to look at a mega trend. We looked at messaging. And so like we weren't really changing anyone's behavior. They had already selected into messaging first, not drift messaging, but just messaging first. So it wasn't a new pattern. It wasn't like a new proposition to convince them of. And so like hypergrowth was in that context of like, we're looking for these really fast growing mega trends that are happening and try to like ride that momentum, that existing behavior change, but also the momentum in that market to try to like pull us forward. So it was less about like, we have to create hypergrowth within the company. It was more about like identifying like hypergrowth opportunities and try to see if we can re-segment or rethink our product in that context.
Okay, so hypergrowth is more something you're able to achieve because you've done a good job identifying or testing as you're going the market and these mega trends. Is there anything internally, that sort of team or process or culture wise that helps maybe explode some of that growth?
I think, yes. I think the thing that we would do internally, which is like one of our values at principles at Drift, is this idea of becoming a learning machine. And it comes from a quote from Charlie Munger. It's like basically, the quote, and I'm paraphrasing, is that, that you can achieve this massive growth over a long period of time if all you do is go to wake up the next day a little bit better than the day before, but even a tiny amount. And like in the short term, it seems like you're not making any progress, but over the long term, it compounds. And so like we take that idea within Drift and try to say like, all right, like our goal, and this is also my obsession, which is around progression and learning anything. It doesn't have to do with this. And so like, let's try to be learning machines and constantly learn all the time. And like, if we can build Drift to be like composed of everyone in the company's like their own personal learning machine for their own reason, not just for Drift, just like their personal mission is to learn and grow, then we can build this collective learning machine, which is the company. And then if we do that, then we can iterate and learn faster and maybe be able to take advantage of some of these things that are happening in the market, but also try to correct a lot of the failures, and it's mostly failures that we're having each and every day.
Makes sense. So as you're kind of continuing on the culture topic, as you're continuing to grow really fast, things change.
Yeah.
Communication gets harder, because maybe some of the agile processes need to be more structured. And even, some people are better fit for earlier stage companies than later on. How do you, I guess, from a high level, how do you think about maintaining or evolving culture as the company grows?
That's a great one. I mean, I think, we've done a number of things. We've said like we spent an insane amount of time kind of in the early days, but we continue to do this kind of like trying to codify what we call our leadership principles. And we have a set of leadership principles that we spend a lot of time not only thinking about, writing, communicating, teaching, incorporating into our hiring process, incorporating into our review process, like just like over and over, and they become the language within Drift. So we spent an insane amount of time doing that. And we did that pretty early, like sub 50 people. We hired a person who used to do learning and development at Amazon, and then before that at Zappos. And so like she really pushed myself and my co-founder to really spend a lot of time doing this, and it's paid off because of her help. And so like we do that, and we do a lot of internal learning around this. But I always say like culture is not really values and these principles that you like talk about. It's really like, to me, it comes down to like, what are the things that you celebrate, right? What are the things that you celebrate within the company? And then what are the things that you tolerate? And so like everyone wants to talk about like hiring for cultural fit, culture, or whatever that means, or your values, but nobody wants to talk about like that actually culture is defined by like what you will not tolerate. And so like, will you have an amazing performer who, you know, is going against everything that you try to define as your values within the company? And if you're not willing to fire that person because of that, then that is your culture. That's the minute that the culture becomes hollow, and that's the minute that becomes, you know, the real culture within a company, no matter what you talk about. So like, I really think it's like what you celebrate and then what you tolerate. And that really defines the culture more than anything. But it's constantly, as you said, it's constantly evolving. Like as we add another person, as our context changes, as we move from like in office to all of us now remote, every one of those like contextual shifts and new additions of people and teams changing, it's constantly evolving. It's never the same. It's not a static thing. But I think a lot of people think about it as some static thing that you can control, which I don't think that's possible.
I like your example of, you know, maybe someone that's been hired or is interviewing is not a culture fit, and you have to decide what you don't put up with. We talk a lot about how, culture and values are best defined by the difficult decisions that they help you make. Do you have other examples of, you know, difficult decisions where you really leaned on the values or the culture to pick a direction?
Sure, we do it every day in terms of like the products that we'll build. We do it in kind of like, it's built into like our view on Drift and what we're trying to do. And like we said from the beginning, like our view is like we're trying to help buyers, right? We're trying to make buying easier for buyers. Very different than everyone in our category that came before, which is really focused on how do we help a company sell? Like help a company sell versus like help a buyer have a better experience. Those are the two sides of the same kind of transaction, but like we're focused here. And so we always take like this, we invert everything and we think like, okay, what's a buyer first kind of approach to do this? And we think that if the buyer has a better experience, if the buyer enjoys this process, and the buyer that will lead to more sales eventually for the company. The company will do better if they treat the buyer better. And we think this because we think the power has shifted from company to buyer. But like every day we're tested on that. Like every day our customers are not the buyers. Our customers are the companies that sell to them, right? And so that every day we're tested on, do we optimize for the company, our customer, or do we optimize for our customers' customers, which is what we're trying to do in the market. And so it's a daily test every day, and we fail that test often, and we have to fix that all the time.
So correct me if I'm wrong. More recently, speaking of buyers and sellers, you all have been moving more into the enterprise space.
Yeah.
Is that right? This is can be a really difficult challenge, big leap, both culturally and product-wise. How are you approaching this?
Yeah, when we started the company, we basically were a touchless freemium only product. Then we got kind of pulled up a little bit more, and so we added some inside sales, and they mostly sold to SMB and a little bit mid-market, and then mid-market and enterprise started dragging more. And then in the last year and a half, almost 2 years, like we've been really pulled by these enterprise companies, especially post-pandemic, post the beginning of the pandemic. Like enterprises really pulled us because they've had to shift from, you know, a hybrid world of physical and digital to like all digital. So like,
interesting.
They've really pulled us. Like in our market, we think that the pandemic has like fast forwarded that enterprise adoption by a decade. It's just like, it's like night and day. So we were really pulled. I think, you know, 50% of our revenue now is enterprise. And that's happened in the last year basically. And so like they've really pulled. That really changes a lot, especially when you think about people that you hire, obviously, product that you build, your product methodology changes a lot, because our approach was always one of this fast in-market kind of iteration, which works on, obviously it works on a consumer side. And then it also worked for us at this like high velocity freemium approach where we had lots and lots of, hundreds of thousands of people using the product. And so that we can test, iterate in flight kind of thing. And so that worked really well. But like when you move to the enterprise, it's a totally different world, right? You can't iterate in market because there's a small number of them. They take a really long time to adopt and onboard anything. And that has nothing to do with, a lot of times, sometimes it has to do with your product, but a lot of times that has nothing to do with your product. Like there's nothing more you could do in your product to make that organization adopt something. And so the signals and the feedback loop is really, really long and therefore slow.
Yeah, how are you and the team dealing with those enterprise sales cycles?
Oh my goodness. Luckily, the sales cycles are okay. We can adjust to that. Really, like the bigger adjustment is from a product development standpoint, design standpoint. That's like really long loops. And so like now it's more in person. When I'm in person, I mean like this, like more one-on-one working with those kind of customers to really understand the problem and iterate, kind of talking through it and mock-ups and stuff like that, but more like one-on-one than, A/B testing and putting something out and seeing what happens, right? The first approach was B2C and kind of the SMB approach that we had. We can just rely on data and dashboards and things like this. And now it's more in-person and, anecdotal kind of stuff that we're learning in the market. And so like, it's a totally different methodology that you have to adopt. And we serve both markets. So like, we have to figure out how to do both.
And I think you recently hired a chief product officer, the first for Drift.
Yeah, probably the hardest hire ever.
Long? Yeah.
Well, they always say like whatever the CEO of the company did before, like if they were in sales, then hiring the first salesperson, that's going to be the most painful thing, mostly for the salesperson, because they're going to deal with this person that thinks they know it all on sales. I'm a product person. I've been a CPO before. And so like I'm hiring a CPO. And so like, that's going to be like the hardest role to hire, and two, probably for that person whose name is Leo, because I'm going to have an opinion on everything probably. So like, it's a hard role, but we got to the point where it was mostly because we were getting pulled into this more of the AI side, more of the enterprise side, where we needed basically someone to teach us that playbook. Like I was saying, we're learning these two different playbooks, and we were comfortable as an organization with this kind of high velocity iterative approach, and we needed someone who could help us more kind of bridge into that enterprise, and that's Leo. And Leo came from Salesforce, and he led the Einstein product there, which is the AI product that they have there, or a platform. And so that really helps us on where we're moving as a company from a technology standpoint.
As you're moving into the enterprise, do you end up facing any like additional regulations or anything like that? I'm not sure if like that happens with marketing sales.
Oh yeah. So much, especially as you go into different countries. But like even within the US, like, and we're not really in healthcare, and we're not in some of the highly regulated areas. We are in insurance and financial services, so that's different. But like even in our core technology side, enterprise tech companies, like it's just a whole different process. You're talking about like lots of legal, lots of contracts, lots of indemnification, lots of data privacy things, lots of like just an endless process to get through. There's like getting to yes, and that that takes a long time, and you think about that in enterprise. And then there's the legal and contract thing, which is like every year it gets worse and worse and harder to go through that process. So that part is pretty long and pretty hard to figure out.
Yeah, so another good reason to bring that CPO in.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
All right, so Drift is also well known for building a great brand. It seems like this was something that was a priority for you from the beginning, and I'm wondering if that was the same at your previous startups, or this was actually something you learned along the way. What does that look like? Yeah,
a couple things happened. I learned a lot of it, when I was CPO at HubSpot. So I got to see, I had never seen a marketing or sales machine like that. since before that, or even since. And so like I had learned a lot there, but that was the input. But the really thing that hit me was like when we were starting Drift, 6 years ago now, we're just like, I thought we were in a different, when it comes to the SaaS market, I thought we were in this, I call it like this third phase of the market. Like I thought we had gone from like, I've seen all, I have enough gray hairs, so I've seen all of them. I've seen like the beginning of the SaaS market, so like the beginning of the cloud, and that was like, you could defend yourself against, that was the discovery phase, right? And so like you could have a moat around your business because you could create some technology that was hard to replicate. And so the technology was the moat. And then in the HubSpot and Zendesk and that kind of era, it was really around like your moat wasn't technology, it was really around business models. Were you SMB? Were you vertical SaaS? Were you horizontal SaaS? Were you, inside sales versus freemium? Were you like all these things we were trying to figure out back then? And there were no blog posts, there were no talks like this, there was no SaaStr, there was like no way to figure this stuff out. And so like you started to build defensibility that way. And so it was like tens of companies, hundreds of companies. But when we were starting Drift, I thought we were in this third phase. And I was like, we're starting in a world where there's thousands of companies and like thousands in our within marketing, all the technology within marketing. Like there's thousands and there's thousands created every year and it's just like endless. And so that phase, I thought when we were starting, I was like, this is like the Procter & Gamble phase. Like we got to figure out like, how do we sell Tide soap for like 10 cents more than, all soap? Like, and you have to build like brand affinity and you have to have brand preference and you have to build this whole thing. So that was really why I focused on brand, but I wasn't a marketer, right? I was an engineer, I was a product person. And so I began to study everything I could read about like brand building, about copywriting, about decision-making, about cognitive biases, like all this stuff. And I just like went crazy on it because I didn't understand. I built marketing technology, but I didn't understand marketing. And so I had to understand it from the human decision-making standpoint. And so I did that. And then I became obsessed around building a brand. And that's what we started out to do. From day one, before we had a product, a Drift.
And we're actually going to go to some of the live audience questions soon, but we got a number of questions about, on the brand side, how you've been able to mobilize the entire company. Because I think that's also something rare. I struggle with this too. How are you getting engineers posting on LinkedIn, to check out content?
Yeah, like if you select for them, I did this when I built the engineering team at HubSpot too. It's just like people were like, how did you get engineers to talk to customers? And because that was a really important thing in the way that we worked. And how do you get them to do support and customers? It's like, we only hire people like that. And so like that goes back to your question before about like the cultural values. What do you tolerate? You don't tolerate. It's just like, if you didn't want to talk to customers, this wasn't the place for you. And so we had to like part ways with amazing, from a technical standpoint, or super productive engineers because they did not want to be part of that. And so, and if you do that over time, then guess what? You wake up and then everyone is like that. And so very similar to Drift, like we probably self-selected for that kind of person across all the teams. And so that was one. That's a harder answer because people can't just retrofit that easily. The easier answer is that we spent, and this goes back to the brand question, like we spent an insane amount of time, and I still spend an insane amount of time trying to teach storytelling within the company, breaking everything down into stories. And instead of doing pitches and decks and traditional things, like we try to back up first and like create a story and make and do a simplified story you can tell a friend. And that becomes the shorthand or the way that people can grok internally what we do. And once they grok it and understand it, then it becomes easier for them to get mobilized and promoted, because like they get some level of mastery. They can repeat the story, they feel comfortable with it, and it's not technical jargon or any of that nonsense. It's just like a simple story about like, why do we exist? What is this product? How would someone use it? Any of those kind of things.
How do you roll that out? Are you doing like role playing?
We do. We have a thing called Drift Insider, which is anyone can sign up for free externally. And so it's like a marketing and sales and service kind of like masterclass, right? There's like all these video lessons and stuff like that we teach, and we have talks and all that kind of stuff on there. So we built that platform, but we have an internal version or internal classes that are also hosted there that are part of our onboarding process. I mentioned before that we spend so much time on onboarding, but we do an insane amount of onboarding related videos, and not only onboarding, just even once you're, years into a role. And so we do those videos internally, and so people take those as part of onboarding, and so storytelling comes in there. So part of onboarding is storytelling, part of mobilizing them, part of like, I care about like every single detail. So like I care about like, like that everyone we do headshots for everyone in the company that, which is harder now with COVID, but like we do headshots, we do all this stuff so that they can create their own brand, their own individual brand. And so like we spend a lot of time doing that.
So speaking of headshots being difficult remotely, as many things are more difficult remotely now, you recently made an announcement about Drift going remote, basically. Is that right?
That is right. I think that was, I can't even remember, last week or something like that, or 2 weeks ago. And so, yeah, I can't tell you, I had to switch cameras here. I apologize, my camera overheated. Yeah, camera overheated. So yeah, I can't tell you how many months of my life I've spent on this decision. A long time. Very long time, embarrassing. And so we were trying to figure out, like, one of the things that we did that I was pretty like outspoken internally about from the very beginning when this started in March, and we kind of shut down the office, is like that to think about this as going through a one-way door, that this wasn't a two-way door, that we weren't going to be like, because there was already internal talk about like, oh, when do we go back? It's like, we're never going back to that. Like, we maybe go back to an office, but we're never going to go back to that version of it, because like we've gone through like this, even back then, and that was just the beginning, we've gone through a massive global level trauma, right? Like a traumatic, massive trauma. And so like if you study history and you look at any major trauma or incident that's happened at a local level or a country level, there's nothing really that's happened at this scale. You see that it's almost, you can never go back, right? Like those people are affected forever. And the obvious examples are like, if you've had great grandparents or grandparents who went through the Depression, like even after they had, all the food in the world and all the money in the world, they could never go back, right? Like that was like so seared in their mind. And we've gone through something that's invisible, right? That we can't even identify, put our hands on. And so like, we're not going to go back to that world. We're always going to have this fear, we'll become a different version after that. And so we spent a lot of time talking about that. That was a lot to talk through. And we talked about that every couple of weeks. And then trying to figure out like, okay, what are we going to do as an office? Are we going to go back or not? And we learned a whole bunch of things. We learned that in our world, because we were fully digital, like we could operate like this, and that we didn't really see, many negatives. There are some negatives. We didn't see many negatives to going back to staying remote. And then we felt like I was really concerned from a health and kind of not only physical health, but a mental health standpoint of like, forcing people to go back to an office, and like, when would we actually feel safe to do that? And so we spent a lot of time doing that, and eventually decided to have this digital first approach, which means that we're all remote. We work only remote, and that we will have some physical spaces around the world where we can have collaboration when that happens. But that's only for collaboration with us or with customers, not to work in.
Cool. All right. Well, we're being bombarded with
sorry
from the audience. Great stuff. So I want to make sure we've got time for lots of these. All right, Jenny's pushing them up. Jessica asked, hi, Jess. What's your goal setting methodology internally? I think she was OKRs.
We have lots. So we have lots. Where do I start? I'd say that what we try to do is like, we have a very like, in some ways, Netflix kind of approach to how we work, right? This idea of freedom and responsibility. When I was at HubSpot, which Jessica was at as well, I called it like autonomy and accountability, like meaning like what you want to have is as much autonomy as possible, but you have to have equal parts accountability. And most times when people want autonomy, what they actually want is anarchy. They want no accountability, just autonomy, do whatever I want. And so like, because of that, we let the individual teams come up with their own kind of methodologies, whether it's sprints or not sprints or things like that. Like, we don't really have an opinion on that. what we do have an opinion on is like that we create a cascading goal approach. And so like we just went through this exercise. And so like each person within the company, including myself, has a set of goals, and all goals are public, but they all cascade. And one of the things like I try to really focus, let's say the people that I work with on the team, so like our CRO or CMO and those people, is like when they set goals that they should cascade down. And so let's say, Lindsay, you had 3 goals. If you had 3 leaders within your team, each one of those leaders should ideally own one of those goals, and none of those goals should be shared. And so like you should have the ability to trace through and say like, okay, Lindsay has 3 goals. She has 3 direct reports. Person A owns this goal, person B this goal, person C owns this goal. And if you can't do that, there's something wrong with either the goal or your organizational design, because you can't have these goals that are going across multiple people, because there's no accountability then, right? And so that's the thing that we're really strong on. And we follow like a book called Playing to Win, which we recommend, which is really just talks about cascading goals. And I learned that book from the founders, Drew and his co-founder at Dropbox. They're really big on that book.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Next question. What do we got? What investments in the brand did Drift make in the initial days?
Sweatshirts, T-shirts.
The swag, the omnipresent early swag question.
Yeah, we spend. I'm like pretty crazy on the swag quality level, I should say. We do a lot of limited run stuff, but no, really like on the brand stuff, we didn't really spend. I'd say the biggest one is that we paid for drift.com, the domain name, which it took me 9 months to pay for, to agree to pay for it, because I was too cheap, because it cost $100,000. Like that was like insane to me. And so like, that's why Drift was originally called Drift with like 2 T's, because I was too cheap to pay for it. I think it was more than 9 months. It might have been over a year. And I finally gave up when no one could spell it, because with most fonts, like F's and T's bleed together. And so like people would put 2 F's, 2 T's, 3 F's, 1 T. Like I own basically every variation you can think of. But I finally gave in. So that was the biggest expense. But like really what we did, and we have a free book called This Won't Scale. And so you can get it on our website. We'll mail it to you, physical copy. But like in that book, we document, I think it's 52 or 50 some odd plays that we did in the early days to build our brand. Most of them didn't involve, almost none of them really involved money, but they were just things that were non-intuitive that people would say, well, I'm not going to do that because it doesn't scale, which is a thing we say a lot in marketing. And so we would say, awesome, we're going to do that because nobody else is doing that. And so we have a chance that if we do, we can stand out because no one else is willing to do it. So we did a lot of physical stuff. We called it like hand-to-hand combat. And so like, I would be involved in everything. I would be personally like mailing stuff to people like randomly, like swag and gifts and books and things like that. And so like, we did that stuff, and that really built the brand in the beginning. I still do it right now.
Justin asks, when does your sales team start selling a product? Before it's even built? Months before it's complete? I love this question.
Well, in the early days, you heard that I was selling product long before we even had a mock-up of a product. So I'm okay selling that early. I think nowadays it's really when we have a product, like we don't sell before we actually have the product. And so we do a thing where we basically divorce, this idea of a marketing launch and a product launch. So the product launch will actually happen ideally long before marketing launch ever happens. And I think one mistake that a lot of companies would do, and I used to do, was like to tie those things together. And so what you would lead to is like a product that was buggy, a product that was incomplete because you were racing to a date. And so like we really honed this back in the HubSpot days when I was there. We would launch something maybe 6 months before we were going to sell it. And we had people using it, on a beta process. And then we would sell those people eventually if it was a for sale product. And then we would have a marketing launch. And that's when we would actually mobilize the sales team. I think that becomes more and more true over time. In the early days, I would sell long before we had anything. But now we can't because we have so many salespeople. As you add people, like you have to go through this training and you have to enable them and you have to do all this stuff, which takes a lot longer than you think.
Drift came head to head with Intercom early, really quick. What are the key steps that resulted that?
Yeah, so we used to compete a little bit, I'd say, with Intercom, which was interesting because, you know, I knew the founders of Intercom before they started that company. So I had known them before, and I, you know, mistakenly did not invest in there. They asked me to invest when they were first starting, and I didn't, which was a mistake. But like, I think, you know, it was hard because I personally knew them and we were coming into this market, and, you know, we had lots of conversations about it. And I was like, my view was like, it was really this megatrend view. It was like, look, we're focused on sales and marketing, which is what we do. We're not really focused on being this all-in-one platform. You know, we are actually going the other way. We never want to be an all-in-one platform, meaning an all-in-one for like support and service and marketing and sales, which is the Intercom approach. We instead are really focused on this revenue piece of it. And, but, you know, the thing that I would talk to them about, I would talk to people about is like, we were betting on this mega trend. And I was saying like, if it's true, everything will have messaging. Like everyone will have a messaging product, not because, oh, someone created a messaging product and therefore we should create a messaging product. No, it had to do with where we were in the market from an adoption standpoint. Long before Intercom, there were lots of other products, and I knew those guys too. Olark and Live Chat and Live Person. Live Person's been around for like 20 something years, right? Like the idea of website chat is a very old idea. The new idea, which is why we started the company and really focused there, was that the world was actually ready to use chat, because now they were using chat in their daily lives. When Live Person, some of those companies were started, I was using chat, but there was like, you know, a few million people in the world that were geeky enough to be using IRC and to be using chat. That wasn't a normal pattern. Like your grandparents weren't using chat back then. Your mom wasn't using chat. Your kids weren't using, like no one was using chat. It was a geeky thing. And that's why for a very, very, very long time, before we got into the market, like chat was really only relegated to support use case. People really didn't use it in a sales and marketing use case because it was still a little fringe, right? So adoption really matters. You know, market adoption really matters when you go into a market.
Jay asks, in the early days of Drift, how did you inspire your colleagues to build their brand on LinkedIn? So we touched on this a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the one thing is, look, Devin said black on black, very cool. Devin, I'll send you one. You know, the early days, I mean, we gave them, you know, a cool profile picture, and we gave them some stuff. And so like they updated their LinkedIn. I don't remember ever being at a point in the company where we asked people to do that. I think it was just like an organic thing. Like we would post stuff we use Slack. And so we would post stuff in our general channel and be like, hey, we just published an article, or like, we just shared this thing, and people would start sharing. I'm not sure why they would start sharing, but it became kind of a snowball thing. Maybe it became a norm in the culture to do that, but it wasn't something that we like really taught or tried to get people. And then people from the outside would always be like, how do you get people to film videos like that and post them on LinkedIn? I was like, I have no idea. We never asked someone to film a video. Like, but they all do. One person doesn't, then it's funny, and the other person. And like, I guess, you know, it comes back to the cultural question, Lindsay. I think it was something that we didn't prescribe, but we celebrated. And when you celebrate it, then like people start adopting it because it was a thing that was celebrated internally.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Drift used a product-led growth model with SMBs. How is Drift using the product to drive growth for acquiring enterprise customers? Ooh, so product-led enterprise growth.
We have a hybrid model, definitely in enterprise, both product-led and sales-led. But I'd say we have one weird advantage at Drift, which is I've never had before, not normal, is that Drift is public on every one of our customers' websites. So we have, because of that, we drive. And this is how we got into the enterprise in the first place. Like we weren't really focused there yet, but someone would see it, you know, someone would interact with it on an SMB website, and then that person might work for one of our early customers, like a Rapid7 or a Red Hat or one of those companies. And so like, then they would bring it in. And so they would adopt it because they saw it, because it said powered by Drift. They would adopt it, and then the thing that would happen, like Rapid7 is a great example because Rapid7 was one of our earliest customers. Like Rapid7 adopted, then all their competitors in the security space saw that on Rapid7's site, and then all of a sudden we had a bazillion security companies, White Hat and Symantec and all those security companies, like they're all customers of ours, but that happened because we had one customer using it and they could actually see it. Like, so many products won't have that advantage. Like if you use a CRM, if you use like a marketing automation tool, like most people are not going to know what that is unless you're super geeky to try to figure it out. On the marketing automation side, on the CRM side, it's impossible. So like most products don't have that. And so that was an advantage we had.
How are you measuring customer success specifically?
Oh my goodness, that's going to be a long answer. It's probably the area that we spend the most time on, and it's different, as you can imagine, per enterprise, SMB. They all measured in very different ways. I don't think we have a great answer yet. I mean, we do all the normal things you would think about, like we look at usage and we look at usage per segment, we look at usage per cohort, we look at usage by plan size, we look at churn by all those variables. We look at every single thing you can imagine in a product from a product standpoint, and then a customer success team standpoint. And I don't think we have the answer yet. I don't know if most companies have an answer, but we definitely don't have an answer yet. And by the way, we are looking for a head of customer success. So if you're listening to this, please hit me up. We'll give Lindsay the referral trip.
Yeah. How they measure customer success. This could be you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so we'll find out how they measure it. So I don't think we have a good answer. I'd say all the standard ways you can imagine, but it's really, one thing that we have as advantage in our product is like everything is tied to revenue. So like part of that customer success measure when we talk to the customers, we can clearly see how much pipeline from a dollar basis, and then how much revenue has been closed that has flowed through or have been impacted because of the use of Drift. And so like it becomes a little bit easier in our world because we can tie back to not something like how many messages you sent or how many bots or whatever, but like how much pipeline have you created, how much revenue have you closed, and then how does that compare against benchmark clients?
Hi, Adrian. So many great folks in this group here.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing your wisdom, Uncle DC. Now he's just kissing. How decide how much time to invest in an idea, and what kill switches do you use to decide an idea is no longer worth, I assume, working on?
Yeah, I think this idea of a kill switch is a really, really great idea. I think that's probably I wish I had a simple formula, but like that's probably the hardest. I will say that we are very willing to kill things. And I think to a lot of people in product who come, or in the other teams, they're surprised how willing we are to walk away from something and kill it. But it always feels way too long to me. Like I wish there was an easy tripwire that we can go through and we're willing to kill something, because as you add more and more clients, customers, like, somebody's going to be using it. It's never like binary. It's never like, 0 customers are using this thing. No one will talk to us about it. No one has ever bought it, and like no one ever uses it, and no one ever swears to you like that this is the reason that they use Drift for this one feature that you want to kill. Like all those things happen to be true all the time, right? Like you'll have customers using it, people will be paying it, people love it, and people will tell you like that is why they're using it, and so that's their brand loyalty is based on that. So it becomes really hard to kill stuff, but we've killed so many things. We'll kill a lot more things in the future. Products that we're working on, so that we have time to experiment. And we view everything as an experiment. Like we roll everything as an experiment. We iterate on everything. And I think, for us, we start to kill stuff like when all the iterations aren't resulting in anything. Like if we're trying to move something in adoption or usage or something on a product, and it's just like flatlining, and no matter what experiment we're trying or like repackaging or repricing, like it's not moving this thing, that's when we kill stuff. And some products, it's easy to do that. And some products, it takes a really long time to figure that out.
Speaking of testing out new features, Jenny, I know you wanted to do some video questions too. I just want to make sure I'm not missing a button or a prompt in here anyway? Do we want to try out some video questions from the audience?
This gold casting is actually pretty cool. I can use lots of these things.
I hear that they're an underscore investment.
Nice.
Great. Can you see me?
Yes.
Welcome.
And thank you so much for today's Fireside Chat. I loved hearing, David, about your the magical moment of reaching product market fit that you described earlier. Mm-hmm. And there's been a movement focused on measuring PMF. I'm curious if you've tried measuring PMF at Drift or anywhere else you've worked at before. Mm-hmm. If not, like what metrics would you recommend founders to track during their PMF journey?
I think you're referring to the article that Raul wrote.
Yes.
PMF. Yeah. So Raul's we actually use that. And so I'll go into that. Raul's an old friend. I was an investor in his last company and in this company, Superhuman. So I've known him for a long time. And he has this great article on measuring product market fit. And we had been obsessed around product market fit at Performable back a long time ago because one of our advisors and key users of our platform was Sean Ellis, and Sean Ellis had basically created a lot of this idea around product market fit and measuring it, and then we took it to the next level. But we use this PMF, this way of calculating PMF, as a replacement for NPS within the product. So we don't actually like to use the NPS measure within our products. Each of our products, we use the product market fit score within there, and we do that on a segment basis we segment it out and we do a whole bunch of things, but we use the PMF score, and that's how we measure progression on a product, on a new product, even existing products. I'm getting more fit, and we do it for segments, and then we do it with personas within the segment. So we might have an IT user, or marketing ops user, or CMO user, and we're trying to measure product market fit for each of those different personas within a segment. It's a really great article. Everyone should check it out. It's a good approach, and Raul's a brilliant guy.
Definitely. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm. I'm muted. I was saying cool. That was very cool. The video. All right. Next up, in the enterprise feedback loop, are you seeing big differences between buyers of product and users of products? Another classic enterprise question.
This is classic 101 here. This is this is the one that that I think we often make a mistake within product teams, and you don't distinguish between those things, because when you sell in the enterprise, there's there might be the people buying the product, there's probably a different group using the product, there are lots of different subgroups that are involved in the product decision, in the buying committee is what we call it, within making the decision. So they have some say on it, and obvious examples on that would be the head of security and legal and IT and all those things, but there's also some non-obvious examples depending on your product. And so we spend a lot of time, and that's why I was mentioning in the product market fit score thing, we will measure product market fits for people who log into the product who are not the core user, but are in that not buying committee, but using committee, if you will. And we'll measure how they like the product and how we can make it better for, let's say, the ops person or the admin person who may log into the product not very often, but we need to make sure that we have product market fit there as well, because they're part of that purchase decision. That is really true within our enterprise segment when we measure PMF. It's not really relevant within the SMB segment and the startup and touchless segments.
Hey, hi, David. Thanks for doing this. Quick question from my side. I know that you guys announced that you will probably be remote for the entire future of sorts. Curious to understand how you're planning to maintain the same enthusiasm on the culture being completely remote.
Yeah, thanks for the question. This is a incomplete. We don't have a complete answer here. We're iterating on it, and this is I won't say a debate, but a discussion that we're trying to figure out here. How do we have the same? One of the questions that we would get internally is we had such a high energy, vibrant in-office culture that we had built, and so people would have been asking, how do we replicate that? And so but people would be asking about that, it's something that we haven't done, and a lot of the answers we've actually been doing it for the last 11 months. Like we have been doing it. Like it was interesting in the announcing of this internally. A lot of questions were like, well, how will we do this remotely, and how will we do that, and how will we hire remotely? How would we onboard remotely? It's like we've onboarded 100 people remotely, in the last year. We've done it already. Like we do it every single day. Like there isn't this like other state. But I think we're trying to figure out new ways and new patterns to really get that energy. But also like we're adopting some new norms of like, you know what, maybe we don't need all that energy. Maybe it's more important that we celebrate, and this is what we're doing actually right now, like that we celebrate that people have time to do other things, and that people have time to like, be able to take care of themselves or take care of their loved ones. And like, maybe that's more important than being like, we have like a lot of energy and like excitement within the office. We're replacing it with new norms. And I think we're becoming a better company because of that.
Got it. Just one follow-up question, David. So basically, you're saying that if you're hiring for a role in the future, you won't look for Boston-based employees. It's going to be outside anywhere.
Yeah, and what we've done is that is the decision of whoever's doing the hiring. So all of our we've unlocked the keys. Like anyone who's hiring anybody within Drift, which is not me. I'm not hiring. I don't hire anybody at this point. So whoever's making that decision, they can decide like, are we going to hire someone in Boston or in South America or in Asia Pac or like around the corner? Who knows? I don't really have an opinion on that, and so that's up to them. So they'll all develop their own norms within their own groups and their own teams.
Awesome. Thanks, David. Thanks, Lindsay.
Thanks. Thank you. Great question. All right. Coming close to the end here, but I think we got time for one or two more. How has your approach to attracting and retaining top talent changed due to the pandemic? So a little bit related to that, hiring during remote times.
I think, one thing that, that we've leaned on, that we've had for a long time now is like we spend a lot of time on internal referrals, and we came up with I've always wanted to have a not normal kind of pattern when we did this thing. When I was at HubSpot and I was trying to rebuild the product and engineering team, I remember I caused a lot of grief because I announced a $50,000 referral bonus program. And so everyone went crazy. CFO lost their mind, and the COO lost their mind because I announced this. But we got an insane amount of people in. But it was just look, if you look at how much you would pay an external recruiter, and you have to remember yes, we may get all these people at the top of the funnel, but you only pay them the people that you hire, right? And you would pay this if you were going external. But that was a not normal thing. At Drift, we didn't do that. What we did was we valued experiences more than just paying someone, which everyone does. And so we said okay, if you refer someone, we'll send you and a friend, a +1. It started anywhere in the country. I think it became anywhere in the world. It's all moot now because we can't travel, but we'll send you for, a long weekend anywhere. And so that was way more exciting. In the end, from a cost standpoint, it was actually pretty much the same. But this idea of travel, of trips and having time off and stuff like that was really energized people. And so we have some people who have many have gone on many vacations because of this referral bonus. And so we still do that now. We're changing it because obviously we can't travel, but we're going to we'll announce something that's just as crazy and just as interesting, just not travel related.
Hi guys. I just wanted to wrap it up, make sure that we're on time. I know everyone's
going all day.
Very valuable. So thank you so much, David. Thank you so much, Lindsay. This was so much fun. I learned a ton. It's so great to have you here. And thank you so much. I just wanted to share one more thing before we departed. To let everyone know about the next events we have coming up in February, March, and May. Some other great speakers that will be joining us on this series. So be sure to check out on our website, and we'll be sending those details as well in a follow-up email. And again, thank you so much to David. It was so wonderful to have you here.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much, Lindsay. This was awesome.
Fun.
Thanks,
Have a great day.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.